Hey guys, it's Alex from Protostar, and I'm bringing you another quick tutorial today. I thought today I'd go through the basics of Thor. Thor is basically my favorite synth. I use it in a lot of applications for pads, main bass sounds, etc. And I know it can be quite daunting when you open it up, especially when you open up the matrix section when you first start producing, and you're like, oh, what the hell do I do? What does this do? What does this do? So I'll just basically show you what the routing does and everything in Thor basically. So let's just go create a Thor, go instruments and Thor polysonic synthesizer. So right off the bat, you get quite a few controls. So the first patch you should get is this, this epic poly, beautiful sound. So what you want to do is you want to right click and initialize patch, and then you can just get to know the ins and outs of this. So first you get range. So this is the pitch bend range. So if I play a note, that's 7 semitones down and 7 semitones up. You can change this range to whatever you want. Normally when you're working with basses and stuff, you want to set the range like to the same, and I normally go for about 12. So I just have it at 12. Then you've got the polyphony or polyphony, whatever you want to say. This basically is the amount of notes you can play at the same time. So at the moment, you can only play 8 notes at the same time. With a lot of basses, you want to put it at 1, not 0. You want to put it at 1. The release polyphony doesn't really matter. That's just when you let go. If some sounds have a long release time, it's how many notes will play at the same, how many notes will continue after that. So it doesn't really matter with that. I just set it up as 1 as well. Then you got the keyboard modes. This is important. So you got polyphonic, which if you got a polyphony of 1, you don't want to really have, because it means all that means is that you can play 2 notes at the same time. I normally go for mono retrig. Basically, that means, for example, if I'm pressing if I press one key and then press a key after it, it will re-trigger that note after it. So hit that key, and you can hear the attack of the second note comes in. And if I go on legato, it means it will just sort of slide. It will like be more of a slide. So if you can hear that difference, the mono re-triggers the initial attack of the sound. So I'll get into envelopes in a second. So it just re-triggers it. You don't even have to press if you just hold down one note, and then you can play different notes on the keyboard, and it'll always re-trigger that first note. So that's what I normally go for. Now portamento, this is sort of the distance between, it will sort of cover the distance between the 2 notes depending on if it's on or off. Auto is it just ignores that part. So if you put it on and then put it maybe to about 50, you'll hear the sliding. And then you can obviously combine this with legato to make it more smooth, or retrig to have a more clubby feel. So I'll just put that at about 36 or something. Now we got the trigger MIDI. So if you want it to be able to receive notes, you'll have that on. If that's off, it won't do anything. So you might be able to hear I'm pressing my keyboard, nothing's happening. So this is, you always pretty much want that to be on. Step sequencer, you can turn that off. That's just to do with this thing. This is if you want to just write notes down here, but that's quite complicated. So I'll save that to later. I'll just turn it off for now. Right, here are the rotaries and the buttons. At the moment, they do nothing. I'm not sure what this does. Like, I don't know about that, but I can show you how to map these. These are basically like, if you have a combinator, you can sort of route them to do things that you want them to do. So you do that in this thing here called the matrix, but I'll leave that for later. And obviously, last thing, master volume. So once you've covered that, you want to press show programmer, and that will just open the belly of the beast, per se. So let's go and deactivate that. That doesn't matter. So this is sort of like the most basic form of a synth. It's just one oscillator going through a filter envelope. Well, actually, no, the filter envelope isn't doing anything. Going through an amp envelope and out and into your ears. So this is the main part you should be worrying about. So this is the oscillator. This is just basically a wave of sound that you can choose by defining what shape. So that's a sawtooth, square wave, a triangle wave, and a sine wave. A lot of like sort of like raspy basses and stuff are made by using squares or saws. As you can hear, let me put the octave down. It's got that nice sort of like buzz. Sine waves are more used for sort of sub basses because they're really like nice and rounded, and you can't really distinguish them. So I'll go through the little things here. KBD, that means keyboard, so it means that it will follow what notes you press on the keyboard. So if you put it at 0, wherever I press on the keyboard, it's the same note. So that's useful if you want to use it, for example, for noise oscillator. I'll get into that in a sec. But normally you want that at 127. 127 is the default maximum value in Reason, by the way. So then you got the octave. So if I press the same note here and bring it up by 1 octave, it'll go up, and that's just, you know, setting the octave in relative to the other oscillators when you have multiple. Semi, obviously, that's a well, blank moment. Semitones, that's the word I was looking for. Dup. So this sets the semitones. So basically, an octave is 8 tones, and a semitone is half a tone. So, for example, like in an octave, no, it's not half a tone. Sorry, I'm talking out my ass. A semitone is just a key on the keyboard. So, you know, a semitone can be like C, C sharp, you know, D, E. So there's 12 semitones in a whole octave. So this is just like fine tuning, for example, because you can have like sevenths and fifths and stuff in your notes, so that it gives it, you know, more texture and stuff. But we'll leave that at 0 for now. And tune, this is quite a good parameter, because you can make your synth sound quite nice and sort of like thick and like textured when you put a tiny bit of detuning on them. So if you listen, okay, that sounds horrible. Let's go up a few octaves. You can hear the detuning. It's like, you know, by half a semitone or something. So let's just keep that at 0. So now let's get onto the actual wave shape. So this is pulse width. This only affects the square wave. So if we chose a square wave, it just changes the shape, like the length of the front part of the square wave and the end part. So that's a really short front part, long end part, and you can't hear it because it's completely at 0. Let's put it up to 4. And you can get loads of different sounds by using different square waves. Now the next thing to do is you can add more than one. Well, actually, let's go through all the oscillators. So you've got wavetable. This is another great oscillator. You've got a lot of choices here. You can just go for example, like let's go for formant. And then basically this has got a load of wavetables inside this one patch, and then you choose which one you want by this knob here called position. And a lot of good bass sounds and stuff you can make by automating this parameter here. And I'll show you how to do that later. So basically, the crossfade, it crossfades between each of the samples that you're going transitioning to between. So if you have the crossfade on, it will sound smooth when you're going through them, and with it off, it will just sound like it jumps between them when you move it. You can hear that. So then we move on to phase modulation. I've never really played around with this much. I think this modulates this one. So you have a basic wave, which is the start. So let's go for that. And then you have a modulator, which would be like, okay, let's go for that. And I'm not sure. This is more about experimentation, really, because I haven't looked into how these, you know, synths work, but I know how they sound, which is just from experimentation. So the amount of phase modulation is determined by this parameter here. So that's none, and that's a lot. FM pair, again, this is modulation again. So this is the carrier and mod. So this is affected by this. So you get your basic sound. If I turn the FM down, FM is used quite a lot for sort of bells type sounds. FM and AM are used quite a lot for those. And then let's just get a mod of maybe 8 and turn the FM up. and then multi-oscillator. This again, experiment with this. This is good for making sort of like flux pavilion-y typey sounds, but Maelstrom is good for that as also. So if I go, for example, let's just keep it on saw and then go fifth up. Right. If you play around, you can add it in and it thickens up your tunes a lot. This is the detune amount as well. So if I have it down at 0, it'll be none, and then it will start detuning, detuning, detuning. And then last but not least, noise. So this is useful for like adding maybe a bit of coloration to your synths if you're doing if you need to thicken it out. I haven't really used noise oscillators much, to be honest. I mean, you can use them for using like white noise razors and stuff. So if you just go on white noise and then if I go there, and then what you can do is you can just like set a low pass, or you can set a state variable and set to band pass so that it sweeps through the frequency. So if I just go, oh, that's a comb. If I go like that and go band pass, and then just choose that and go, you can have like a nice sort of like sweep up and stuff. So we've covered all the basic oscillators in Thor. So let's just go to analog because that's the most common, and I'll just stick it on sawtooth. Next thing you want to look at is the amp envelope. This is what gives the sound its characteristics. So it gives it its first punch and then the trail after. So with the default, it gives it a sort of a nice punch, and then it sort of has a tail which fades after a while when you hold the note down. As you can see, the levels going down here, and you can hear it as well. So what normally in electronic music is just full decay, full sustain. So that it's called ADSR envelope. It's attack, decay, sustain, release. So the attack is how fast it takes for the first initial sound to come in. The decay is the loudest point, basically, and then the sustain is how long that's going to be held for, and then the release is when you release the key, how long that note is going to take to die out. So if I have a long attack, you hear it misses out that first sort of kick because it's got a long attack. It takes longer to come into the actual sound. If you have a really long attack, useful for that. Use that for like pad sounds and stuff. But what we normally do is put it to maybe about 3 milliseconds. I have mine normally 3.9, maybe a bit shorter actually, 1 point. So yeah, that'll be good. And then release, you can change this to what you want really. With bass sounds, you want it to have quite a quick release, but not so quick that it just pops. If you have quite a long release, it'll get annoying it'll make your song sound quite messy, unless you're using it for pad sounds. See, I'm just tapping the key there. So just have that about 30. Next, we want to look at the routing of the audio signal. So this whole thing layout here might be quite confusing to you, but let's just work with one oscillator first. So you follow the oscillator, so it goes arrow down here into mixer. So this is the first thing you come across. This basically sorts out the levels between all three of these. So they first come into here, and if you have a synth here, for example, and I go have a square wave and put the pulse width to there and put the okay, that'll be fine. I have to activate this so that it will go through filter 1. So this is the activation key. And then you can change the levels between 1 and 2 with this. So you can change the master level of 1 and 2 with this, and then the mix between the two. So for example, if I go like that, it's all of this. And all the way over there, it's just all of this. Between the two, it's half and half. You can change the levels you want. That sounds quite good. And then you change the master level with this thing here. So once that's done, then it generally goes out to filter 1 here. So I'll just create you a simple wobble. So you go to a low pass ladder filter, which is an alright filter. It just basically cuts off the top frequencies. These are the decibel types. So basically this is like 24 decibels, 18 decibels, 12 decibels, 6 decibels. It's the amount that it cuts off. Self-oscillating, that can introduce some nice characteristics in the sound. I'll show you in a second when we get it wobbling. And this is the filter envelope. So this is how much the envelope will affect the filter opening up. So if I've got like a big decay and sustain, then the filter will it will open up really quickly and just sustain. If I have an attack on it though, it like you know, it sweeps in. But for what we're doing, you're going to want a low attack, and then have release is all right. So this inverts the filter envelope, so it turns it upside down. So instead of having a short attack, it has a really long attack and a really low decay. This is how much the velocity affects the filter. Normally I just leave this alone and I fine tune sounds later with this. And this is the keyboard. You don't want to have this normally because this is how much your keyboard position affects the frequency. I think it's the frequency at least. The drive can be useful to make the sound a bit grittier. But once it's gone through here, forgot to talk about this. Frequency is obviously the frequency at which, if it's a low pass, then it's the frequency at which it cuts the sound. So for example, that's no cutting, and then pretty much all cutting there. So just keep it about 260. And the resonance is how the best way I could explain it is to produce a equalizer. So the best way I could explain the resonance is if I gain that up a bit. The resonance is how big that is. It's the Q basically. So if the resonance is really high, it's a big area that it's affecting, and it's quite piercing. But then if the resonance is quite low, I think I'm the right way around, by the way, I'm not sure. It's just an acute area. I think I'm the, yeah, so I think that's right. So if the resonance is high, it's a big Q, so it affects a big area, or low Q, sorry. And then resonance is low, it'll be a shorter Q. It could be the other way, don't hold me to that, but it's the principle. So you normally want to have a bit of resonance so that it has a bit of character, but not too much, unless you want that kind of piercing, really bell-like sound. So then it goes into the shaper. This can edit quite a bit of your sound. If you have it, I normally leave it off, but then if you have the shaper on, soft clip rounds it sort of rounds the shape off, takes a bit of the warmthness out. You can change it to hard clip and drive it, so you've got like gritty sound. You've got quite a few of these to play with as well. But the one I normally go for if I'm going to use anything is hard clip. Also, I forgot to mention, you can also route the sounds to go, after they go through the mixer, you can route them to go through filter 2 as well, so you have two sounds in parallel. So if I go for a comb filter, for example, and then activate just one, so the sound will go in through here, two of them, and 1 and 2 will come out here, and just 1 will come out here, and then they're running in parallel, so there's two sound sort of tracks going, one above and one below. And the way you can hear it is just like, if I activate this, you can hear that. So I normally just work with one. Or you can also, instead of activating that, you can activate this arrow here. So basically it means the sound comes through here and goes right into the amp. So what you can do is you can send it left so that it will pass through that filter and then pass through this filter. It's quite useful for like making quite complex textures. So after that's done, I'm trying to think. Right, it goes through the amp, so you can change. I haven't really ever played around with the velocity. Okay, the velocity is how much your keyboard velocity affects the amplitude of the waveform. So I normally just keep that at 0. Then the gain is just how much you gain the sound. So this is just like a normal amp really, and then the pan is same. So I never touch this. I do everything outside. And then filter 3, if you want to add another filter, you can here. It might be best to explain the different filter types. So I've shown you low pass. This is state variable. So you've got low pass 12, so low pass 12 decibels. Band pass, so basically what this is doing is, if I just create a quick okay, so this is basically like doing this. If, for example, this is a bad example, but like if it's on bandpass, the frequency, this bit here is just showing here, so it's only letting through these frequencies, and when you sweep through, it only lets through those frequencies. And the notch and peak, not, I think that's what it is. Yeah. a notch and peak. So a notch is basically, for example, if I go like this, whack-a-mole at the top, notch is that, it cuts out certain frequencies. I think it's more acute than the bandpass, and then peak is pretty much the same as a bandpass. I never really experiment between the two though, so I can't be, for sure. And HP is high pass, so basically that instead of letting through the low frequencies, it will just do. I got it this. If it's instead of letting through the low frequencies, it will do this. That's a high pass, so it lets through all the high frequencies and cuts out the lows, and then the low pass is this, so it cuts out all the high frequencies and just leaves the low. Right. Also, yeah, here a notch, it changes between low pass and high pass, and not if you chosen notch or peak, so you can have more low frequencies come through or more high frequencies. Envelope stuff again. Comb filter. This is quite interesting. I'm not sure how it works, but it has a sort of to experiment with it. You have to experiment with it to know its sound. I don't know how to. This is like one of my favorite filters. I use it quite a lot. It sort of gives it a phasing quality, and the comb you can change it to be positive or inverted. Formant. This is sort of like the formant is sort of like what gives a sound its characteristics. So formants, they're normally used in talking about people speaking and yars and stuff like that. So the position changes the characteristic of the sound. So if I'm playing it, sounds like someone's going yeah. This is not how I do my yars. I do it by using like downsampling techniques, using it's technically downsampling, but I'll get into that later. So global env. Well, I think that's just basically like you can use it to control any parameter really. I haven't really ever used global env. And obviously chorus, you can add a bit of chorus for a bit of widening of the sound. And delay, if you want to put some delay, you can tempo sync it as well. So instead of saying milliseconds, it will say time divisions. So that's just like having a delay unit added on. So after we've done all that, we've got a basic sound. Let's turn off the chorus. So into the important part, routing. The main part with dubstep is the routing here. So you can, you could automate everything manually, but that's just too much hassle, I think, because then some people like to do it, but I prefer to set this up. So I use LFO1, sometimes LFO2. LFO2 is used normally if you want to use the LFO outside of it. So LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. So these oscillators are running really fast, thousands of hertz, or if you've got really high sound, thousands of hertz, sometimes hundreds of hertz. So for like normal sounds, this is like more, along the 1 hertz or 5 hertz. It just basically follows the amplitude of the waveform. So the basics of a wobble is you change the frequency normally with the LFO. You can do stuff as well like pulse width and stuff, and it sounds quite cool, but the basics is just changing the frequency with the waveform. So if I go LFO1, and then so that's the source, and we want the destination to be that frequency there. So go filter 1 frequency, and then I play. You can't hear anything because I haven't changed the amount. So let's up that to about 75. And that's a basic wobble. You want to add your sub in after it and stuff, but you can change like the position of the start. So that'll be the mid position, so it'll go down and up, down and up, down and up. Now what you want to do is key sync it, which basically means it will start the LFO every time you hit the key, and tempo sync, which syncs the whole it syncs the waveform to the tempo. So then you'll see the rate is displayed in divisions now. Okay, so the delay is how long it waits before the LFO actually starts. So it'll be a straight line and then it starts. And keyboard follow is how fast it is in relative to your keyboard position. So if you're really high up, it'll be really fast. Low down, it'll be slower. I don't use that, or sometimes I use the delay. But so that's basic setting up of a synth module. That's like the basics. I won't get into using the step sequencer now because it is quite difficult and it will make this tutorial longer than it already is. So that's the basics. Oh, I can tell you also, yeah, I forgot about this. If you want to make it so that you can change stuff with this, for example, if I want it so that the LFO won't affect the frequency all the time, I can set the scale to this thing here. So the scale is like basically the scale is, you know, how much it affects it. So, or, you know, a controller. So I can set it to that or that or that. So if I go scale and go, where is it? Rotary one, modifiers rotary one. So this won't do anything at the moment. But then if I put the amount to 100, when it's at 0, the LFO doesn't. The LFO basically that when this is at 0, it brings this amount down to 0 as well. And when I bring it up to 127, it brings it up to 72, the max value I've got there. So that can be useful, for example, if you want to have a bass that's capable of doing a straight noise and a wobble, or you want to have a button which can turn it on or off. It's up to you. You can control a lot of things. Also, if you want to have a source here, for example, let's just go. Forgot to explain about the mod envelope actually. So, for example, if I turn this off and then I don't want to use a wobble, I want to have one initial sound of it opening and then stay open, I'll use the mod envelope and I'll have the attack. This is basically the same as the filter envelope. So I can have the decay quite high and the release low and just put the attack at about 9 and then go here and go mod envelope, and then if I put the attack up, it will open up and stay open. You can turn this upside down, I think, as well, or you can tempo sync it as well. But yeah, that's the basics of Thor. After you've got this, you can, you know, if you want to create like a screen for, go ahead and then just put it on like, you know, tape saturation, drive the compression up, damn it, and then just like, you know, reverb or something. But then what I normally do is I create everything in Combinator so I can save it as my own patches. So I just go combine, and then I've got a patch and I can save it to whatever I want. Here you can also set 2 destinations. So for example, if I wanted LFO1 to affect the frequency here and the frequency here, I'd go frequency, filter 1 frequency, and filter 2 frequency. Let's go frequency. And then I put the amount to what I want on both of them, so I can make them go in opposite directions. And yeah, these useful buttons here also clear the line. So the difference between this one and this one, by the way, is that this has 2 destinations and 1 scale, and this one has 1 destination and 2 different scales. So you could, this one will have 1 destination, one thing, 1 source is affecting, but you can control it with you can control 2 different variables of it, with, you know, with 2 different things. I mainly use this bit here and this bit here, but you can use what you want. So yeah, I hope this tutorial has been a bit helpful for you and it sort of like not over confuse things even more, you know, than they already are. But Thor is quite a big beast to learn how to use properly, and once you do, it's so satisfying to get that, you know, to know how to use it. So I hope this has been of help, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Oh, and also check out my EP. Bye.